Welcome to Presence, a global conversation for a new earth.
And hello, everyone, and welcome to Presence. It is 2023. We're headed into a new year, and we are getting ready to start a new series called Global Conversations. That is our tagline, right? A global conversation for a new earth. And the message of presence, meaning the message of the biblical narrative, is expanding into global circles. This year, I'll be introducing a number of conversations that have to do with different people across the planet that are all working toward a more unified, integrated, integral understanding of our world and the source from which all things are manifested. So I've said before in some of the previous podcasts and newsletters, etc., that Presence now has been invited into a group called Evolutionary Leaders. The Evolutionary Leaders movement is not exclusionary in nature, but rather is attempting to start with a core of authors, teachers, those who are adding to the leading thought on the planet, if you will, and then spreading out. And I'll talk about plans for action in a little bit here. The evolutionary leaders meet in what's known as synergy circles. Those synergy circles represent a wide variety and diversity in terms of fields of study. But here's the thing about presence. We are talking outside of Christianity. Why were we invited in to join the evolutionary leaders movement? Well, it's because we align the biblical narrative with narratives from quantum physics, evolutionary biology, the arts, psychology, philosophy, education, economics, and many other fields. In fact, the synergy circles have come up with an initial, not written in stone, because evolution always changes via our life conditions, to call for us to address things with relation to the change that occurs in our lives. But the initial meeting and writing and consideration of a narrative resulted in what they call a unitive narrative. And this unitive narrative is simply a statement of the universal values and the spirituality supported by those from these many different fields. The unitive narrative is not a religion. Not a religion, it's just a statement of the values of the spirit. I'll talk more about that in just a minute. But let me make a few observations from my point of view about where we are in history with regard to the world's largest religious empire, largest religion, and that's Christianity, at least to this point. So what I'm observing is that, first of all, in terms of communication, talking about the biblical narrative, that communication is Christian to Christian. Christians talk to Christians. Theologians talk to theologians. Pastors talk to their congregations, et cetera, et cetera. And then these different points of view, which are separated into denominations that go to separate buildings, they then argue with each other on social media, in different places, about, well, a variety of things, even including who is or who isn't a true Christian. And that's why we're not part of that. And that's also why they're not represented in the evolutionary leaders' movements, because Christianity is very much a particularistic, siloed group. They are not part of a global conversation. They are simply a Christian conversation, and that conversation becomes one shared by fewer and fewer people as we move forward. So, I've said for some time in these podcasts, look, the ceiling for Christianity is postmodernity. Why? Because postmodernity is as far as you can go with a religion before you make the evolutionary leap into that which is universal God identity. Postmodern theologians have had to get further and further away from the context and the historical setting of the biblical narrative in order that they can support the concept of coexist. Coexist is a postmodern value. That's where interfaith ministries come from. They are great steps forward, but that's the ceiling as far as religion can go, is to just talk to each other, and then everybody's religion go their separate ways. And if you're in Christianity, all you denominated groups go your separate ways. Presence is not a coexist narrative. Even the concept of the word presence, think about the definition of the word presence. Presence as a concept cannot coexist. Presence just represents the totality of what is. Presence is formless in the sense that you can't even use the Webb telescope, as powerful as it is, to say, look, there's presence. Right now, the other observation I would make is that the biblical narrative is primarily a United States narrative. It's a United States Jesus, it's United States teaching, and therefore it's become really, the biblical narrative is used primarily by theologians in a highly politicized story. It's a politicized story. It's stories about the things that are going on here in our nation. And Jesus is turned into a political figure more than anything else, who rails against the empire. And of course, the empire depends upon what political party you belong to. And so that's about as good as it gets when you talk about postmodern theology. Now, the problem is there's 194 other countries in the world. The United States does not own the biblical narrative. For example, I'm talking right now with two people at The Hague in the Netherlands. That region of the world, that part of the world, doesn't have the politics the US has. The way US theologians talk about the biblical narrative today would not have any meaning for them or for many in the rest of the world. But that's as good as you can do with postmodern theology. And then the question keeps coming back, why are they talking to presence? Why would people who are involved in the government in the Netherlands talk to me? Well, here's one interesting fact. The two people I'm talking with use within their work, within their culture, spiral dynamics. They use spiral dynamics in their government and their relationships within government. Why'd they reach out to me? They reached out to me to discuss the introduction of spirituality into government, not religion. Look, Europe has disconnected from especially the church. When you talk about Christianity, very few in Europe even go to church. And it's headed this way. All the research groups tell us that. Barna Research Group, Pew Research Group. Great changes are happening right now. And the question is, what will become of this biblical narrative? So what we're finding is that it's not Christianity that's a part of global conversations using the biblical narrative as a religious form to which one attaches their identity as Christian. Rather, it is the presence message that started some time ago with the work of Max King and now continues on through all those of us who are attempting to have discussions with people that are still within that form. Spirituality, however, is about universal values. That's why I mentioned, I think in the last newsletter, values of the Spirit. Paul speaks of the fruits of the Spirit. I tweak that a little bit to say values of the Spirit, because the fruits that are manifested are on the basis of the values we hold. And it is Spirit which brings about unity. Paul speaks so much about the unity of the Spirit, not the unity that comes through human doing, human correct interpretation, human correct denomination, human correct this or that. It's the values that come from the Spirit. And those values are shared throughout the evolutionary leaders group, and the unitive narrative, again, that is an initial narrative agreed upon by the evolutionary leaders group, is based on values defined as spirituality. And this is actually biblical language in that sense. When you think about Christianity as a religion, well, it's not unique in the sense that all religions are boundary driven. You have to have boundaries that determine whether or not you are a Christian or not a Christian, etc., etc., etc. But as we have been saying, and I want to reemphasize this over and over, the narratives, the wisdom narratives from which these religions have derived, they are not boundary driven. They rather point to a freedom of identity, universal and therefore beyond boundary. You know, you could go out and listen to a series by Wayne Dyer on the Tao and not be a Taoist. You can read Eckhart Tolle's A New Earth and not be a Buddhist. You can see how quantum physicist Dr. Jude Currivan uses the concept of Indra's net to describe the nature of the universe and not be a Hindu. All narratives teach about the values of love. Can we not say that those values can be derived from a variety of different narratives without concretizing a narrative into a religion with boundaries? So, sitting back from this point of observation, it seems to me that the United States is Christianity's last stand, pretty much. There are parts of the world that it continues to grow, and those parts of the world where it's growing are the more fundamentalist parts of the world, with the more fundamentalist interpretations of it. However, if you want to look for power and authority, it's the US. I mean, the US is where you find theologians, you find the authorities of the seminary, the church authorities, pastors, and everyone else in that kingdom is subject. They're the subjects. In fact, one of the things I've been following is the vote that's taking place in the mainline denomination, the Methodist Church. And I ran across a couple quotes from one of the leaders of the Methodist Church in Africa. And he made the statement that we here in Africa, in the Methodist here in Africa, will not be controlled by the Methodist leaders of the United States. And what he was saying was, look, Methodists are splitting into global Methodists and then those that remain United Methodists. And the split is over LGBTQ issues. And once again, this is just another affirmation that Christianity is a form, because division can only be found in the realm of form. This is why Paul talks about spirit and unity. Unity is only going to be found in the realm of spirit, and spirit's formlessness. It is formlessness. And this is why we are going to continue to challenge that particular Christological interpretation. Christology for 2,000 years has been interpreted as a form. We see Christology not a form, but rather transform, as in a transformative action of dying to the first world and rising into the new world, the new creation. It's not about Christ. It's about that to which Christ points. And Christ points us to the universal God who is all in all. I think I brought that up a time or two. You may have heard all in all a time or two, but you know what? This is interesting because in the evolutionary leaders movement, there are a lot of people who haven't heard some of these points. As a matter of fact, in the evolutionary leaders movement, the biblical narrative, whether you're quoting from it or reading from it, is like fingernails on a blackboard. I mean, it's difficult for people when they find out you want to bring in some type of scripture or biblical narrative. It's hard for people at first to imagine that there could be anything at this point other than a message of conversion and, again, of separation, even all the way down into the human. Are we going to hell? Or are we going to heaven? Separation everywhere in the message. That brings me to my first guest in this series. And by the way, this global global conversation series will feature different guests who are primarily from outside of religion, but they have a keen interest in spirituality and the very values and the very things that we see the biblical narrative teaching. And so you're going to hear from a number of evolutionary leaders this year in my podcast when I say that our global series, the global conversation series, is featuring this person or that person. And the first one is going to be Dr. Riane Eisler. Let me tell you, I've been doing Zooms with her now for some time, since last fall, with some other people as well, putting together some content and material and doing some planning. She is an amazing woman. Riane and her family escaped Germany and the Nazis when she was 8 years old. Yes, now she is 91, amazingly active. Riane has spoken before the US Congress. She's spoken to the General Assembly at the UN. She has even worked with the Yeltsin administration in the Soviet Union when Yeltsin was attempting to have a peaceful dissolution of the Soviet Union, and when Yeltsin was attempting to introduce the first democratic elections And you will see in Riane's work, she is a historian of the highest caliber. And you will see how she is really moving a message of moving from hierarchies that are dominator hierarchies into partnership societies, partnership families. It works all the way down into the family. Now, I'm very honored to say that they're doing a series of episodes with Riane where different groups from the evolutionary leaders will be having an episode with her. And this series will be quite a number of, I don't even know how long, 10, 12, maybe more, as they go through the year in evolutionary leaders. Because Riane has the 4 cornerstones that she has proposed for the planet, for Earth. In fact, Desmond Tutu said that Riane Eisler's work is about the world we all so urgently need. That's Desmond Tutu. So it tells you why there's a real desire by so many of the evolutionary leaders, including myself, to be part of this series. And I've been invited to do the first episode of this new series. And in fact, it's already been recorded. It's now being packaged, and it'll have graphics and introduction and all that good stuff. When it's finished, I'll be putting it on the Presence webpage, Facebook page. I'll have it also on my Facebook page, and then we'll also put the link into future newsletters that I send out as I'm talking directly to Riane. I'll talk about that in just a minute. Now, the cool thing about where evolutionary leaders now are now is that they're moving into planning and activism with a converged, diverse field of people and folks, and coming from different studies, et cetera, et cetera. So the whole point is to make the global conversation manifest global action for change. So yes, we can continue to have our global conversation, but it's now moving into global action. And the people that are still siloed and in their boxes and in their forms and attached to religious identities are going to see the world moving forward in a different direction. This is something we've been saying for decades, but like any new idea, it's always resisted initially. And I get that. I see that. It doesn't make sense. It's crazy. How could that be? That could never happen. The temple will never fall. The empire will never collapse. The seminary will never empty. The church building will never empty. So you're going to see that I bring the same principles, foundational principles, into her work that I use in my podcast. That's why I'm part of this movement, because it integrates with everything that you would ever want to do in science or in the realm of beauty, the arts, et cetera, et cetera. And when you listen to this first podcast that's been done by the evolutionary leaders, you will hear me speak of form, transform, and formless when I'm talking to Riane. You will hear me talk about the quantum spirituality idea of the explicate order and the implicate order, which goes into the work of those in the field of quantum physics. Now, am I going to agree with everything that these different leaders believe? Are you going to hear things that indicate that some of these folks don't know the biblical narrative very well, if at all? Yeah. But how else can a global conversation happen? I mean, why would we need to have a global conversation if we were all on the same page? But when you start seeing how the principles of integration and integral consciousness and convergence of all these different fields is happening, it's in process, then those conversations have to take place. But you can't do it from a particularistic interpretation of your narrative. You can't take on a particularistic siloed viewpoint because you are within the walls of whatever it is. Of course, where we work, we're talking to people that are sheltered inside the walls of Christianity. So this is where we're headed. This is where we're going. I'm very excited about the series. And of course, I would invite you to send in any questions you have as we go along. And I'll do my best to continue to address those and answer them in future podcasts. But this is exciting. This is exciting again, because what you're going to hear is conversations with people like Dr. Jude Currivan, who's a quantum physicist, and she'll be a guest where we talk about quantum spirituality as a part of the nature of quantum physics. And it will be coming from someone who validates what we've been saying all along. And the same is going to be true when we talk to people in philosophy, psychology, again, the arts, music. So I'm very excited to be bringing this series to you. And I'm very excited that this all starts with the work of my dad. In fact, when you listen to the Evolutionary Leaders' first episode with Riane and myself, in the introduction, when I'm introduced, Dr. Kurt Johnson, one of the things that he puts in my bio as he introduces me is that I'm the son of well-known theologian Max King. So here I am talking to evolutionary leaders, all of whom have their own audiences, including the Evolutionary Leaders Synergy Circle for media. There is a whole synergy circle for media. You're talking TV, radio, social media, and they're part of the strategy of how to bring these things into all countries of the world. And here in the midst of all that is something that began in a book published in 1971 in my dad's work, and then has grown since then. I'm involved in it now. You're involved in it. Every person listening to this that's been following Presence is involved in it. And it will supersede me because no person, no human owns the narrative. The narrative can come through us if we allow it, but it's not of us. If we're lucky enough, we become aware of things that can benefit ourselves and benefit others, and then do our best to have the courage to share that, even when most of the empire that currently stands, most of those in a 2,000-year-old embedded paradigm, don't really have any interest in it. So, one final thing I'll say before I finish here, and that is I did include in the newsletter a link to a new book coming out on the holo movement. It is a term that was introduced by the quantum physicist David Bohm, who also saw that the source of this universe had to be a source of intelligence, a source of spiritual values. And it is a book that has contributions of chapters by a number of different authors. It's divided into two parts, with each part having contributions and chapters by different authors. At the end of the book, I do short epilogue type writing, along with Kurt Johnson, and a final note from Ken Wilber. So again, I'm very happy that presence is going to be represented in this book, and it's a sign of things to come, because this message was never intended to be hidden under the basket or the form of a religion. This message was a light to be shining and shared throughout the entire planet. So that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to keep on keeping on. And again, if you have any questions about any of this, you're welcome to reach out to me at any time. So you'll be notified as far as the Evolutionary Leaders episode I did with Riane. You'll also get notification through the newsletter of when my interview with Riane is going to be aired. That's going to be done strictly between me and Riane for presence. So stay tuned. Welcome to 2023. Fasten your seatbelt. We're ready to roll. I'll see you next time.
Thank you for joining us today. If you have any questions or comments, please contact us at info@presence.tv. You can also visit our website at presence.tv or find us on Facebook. We look forward to hearing from you.